Thank you, May, and thank you, ILRF. It's really inspiring to be in the presence of so many activists who are committed to changing the world. Our international president, Leo Gerard, and Vice President Fred Redmond, who's led our work in Liberia, truly regret not being here tonight, but they're at a meeting in Pittsburgh of our International Executive Board, which is strategizing right now on what the steelworkers can do to expand and escalate our participation in the We Are One actions. And we believe in the steelworkers that if we're going to defend and extend workers' rights, we can't do it in one state. We can't do it in one country. We've got to do it around the world, and we do that by building a global labor movement that can go toe-to-toe with global capital. The Firestone Agricultural Workers Union of Liberia, FAWUL, provides a shining example both of what's possible as well as the obstacles we're up against. And this award tonight really belongs to the thousands of rubber workers in Liberia who put their lives on the line to organize in the face of fierce corporate resistance to bring the first democratic and independent labor union to Firestone in 85 years. Recognition also needs to go to the ILRF and the Stop Firestone campaign for their tireless efforts to expose the evils of child labor at Firestone. We value our work together. At the USW, we represent Bridgestone Firestone workers across the United States. We've had a lot of battles with the company over the years. And in 2005, we were in another tough contract fight. We sent a fact-finding delegation to Liberia to look at the working conditions there and to see if we can make common cause with the workers that produce latex for Firestone. The facts on the ground were ugly. There was a so-called union, but Firestone determined who got to run for union office, and Firestone decided who was allowed to vote. And they had a contract, and it had the same categories you'll see in a contract book here in the United States. But if you look under wages, what it said in its entirety was, wages are solely at the discretion of the company. So Firestone, you got to give them credit. They don't even pretend, right? They don't even pretend that there's any democracy or that workers have any say in what happens in their lives, right? Firestone was decades ahead of Scott Walker when it comes to denying people collective bargaining rights. But it gets worse, because the plantation was one massive company, one massive company town, right? You live and work at Firestone, you're totally dependent on the company for every possible service. So the workers and their families were organized in camps, one-room shacks that were falling down, families crowded into that one room, no running water, no toilet facilities, no electricity. This is in the 21st century. Working for one of the most profitable multinational corporations in the world. And just a short distance from those slums, Firestone managers lived in houses with satellite TV dishes, homes that would be look perfectly at place in an affluent community here in Washington, D.C. And not only that, but they had a golf course and a country club. So the dozens of families that live in the workers' camps all share a single hand pump that might spit out some polluted water serving dozens of families. And yet Firestone has the resources to manicure and water its golf course. But that's not even the worst injustice. The rubber tappers had to tap over 1,000 trees a day was their quota, right? And if they met that quota, then they would receive their daily wage of $3 a day. Again, we're talking about Bridgestone Firestone, a company that over the years has made billions and billions of dollars extracting Liberia's resources and exploiting its citizens, and they're paying them $3 a day. And if you don't make the quota, you also don't receive your rice ration, so you have no food to feed your family. During a notorious interview a few years ago, the Firestone executive who oversees the Liberian rubber operation, he's based here in the United States, he told CNN, he downplayed the quota and the work that was involved. He said it was really no big deal because it only takes 2 minutes to tap a rubber tree. Well, even using Firestone's very dubious estimates on the time involved in tapping a rubber tree, you do the math on that, it works out for some of these tappers to a work day of 21 hours a day. That's using the company's own figures. So in a situation like that, of course, the tappers had no choice. If they wanted to feed their families, if they wanted to put rice on the table, they had to put their families to work. Their children, their spouses assisted them in the job of the rubber tapper. And they had no choice than to put their families to work if they were going to meet these outrageous corporate demands. Well, soon after our delegation was there, and as the ILRF and Stop Firestone campaign were stepping up, shining a spotlight on these practices, a group of workers got together. At first, there were only 24 of them. But they called themselves the Aggrieved Workers Committee, and they began the process of step by step, one by one, talking to their co-workers, organizing, and they launched a wildcat strike. And they brought the plantation to a standstill. They paralyzed production at Firestone. And it's funny, none of those Firestone managers came out to take the 2 minutes to tap any of those rubber trees. They brought it to a standstill. And Firestone, of course, is the largest private employer in Liberia. It created an economic crisis across the country. The newly elected president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, was forced to intervene, and as a result, Firestone was forced to sign agreements that they were going to build more housing, build more schools, put more clinics in place. But they still resisted elections to have a real union on their plantation. They still wanted that total control. Empowered by the effectiveness of that strike, workers continued to demand a voice. Months went by where there was no election. They kept moving the goalpost. The workers organized a second wildcat strike. And this time, once again, they shut it down. This time, Firestone responded with violence. They unleashed security forces. Workers were clubbed. Strike leaders were arrested, jailed, and beaten. Families were tear gassed. At least one worker died as a result of injuries suffered from the security forces. But they did not back down. And ultimately, the unity of the workers prevailed. In July of 2007, I was able to serve as an international observer where, for the first time in Firestone's history, there were free and fair elections. Rubber tappers got up at 4 in the morning. Yeah, give them a hand. Rubber workers got up at 4 in the morning. They didn't finish until early in the evening, and then they waited in long lines patiently to cast a vote for their union leaders. And you know what? The leaders of the strike won the elections in a landslide. Firestone still tried to nullify the results of the election. The case actually went all the way to the Liberian Supreme Court. But the workers won. Their union was recognized. They got collective bargaining rights. They organized a contract with Firestone. In that process, they were able to reduce the quota of rubber trees. They were able to gain union protections. Throughout this whole process, the USW and the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center worked closely with Liberian trade unionists, developing programs to address health and safety issues, training new shop stewards, working on collective bargaining. But I'll tell you what, we learned a hell of a lot from the Liberians about membership mobilization and what it takes to fight. I'm going to close with just one more example of the fight that's underway in Liberia. Powell took on another major challenge this last year. They called for an end to the system of how rubber is transported, how latex is transported. You look at the slide, these buckets you see, each one of them weighs 75 pounds. Firestone would place a yoke across workers' backs with those 150 pounds and force them to walk, in some cases as far as 3 miles, to the weighing station, right? So that they could get credit for their quota of latex for the day. For 85 years, Firestone imposed this abusive system on the workers in Liberia. Well, in 2010, Powell said, enough. We need trucks. We need tractors that can transport this latex. Firestone resisted. They told them that this is the way it's done in rubber plantations all over the world. Well, that's bullshit, right? We know better. Working with the Solidarity Center, we contacted the Rubber Workers Union in Malaysia. We sent them photos of what was happening in Liberia. They were shocked. They said that is so archaic. We haven't done it that way in Malaysia in years. They sent us photos of trucks and motorbikes they used to transport the latex. We shared that information with the Fawul in Liberia. The next time Firestone came to the bargaining table and started repeating this line that we have to do it this way, this is standard operating practice in rubber plantations all over the world, Fawul broke out those photographs, looked Firestone in the eye and said, "You're lying. It's not the way they do it in Malaysia, and it's not the way we're going to do it in Liberia anymore." And at that point, Firestone had the arrogance and the inhumanity to say that, okay, well, you know, the terrain is different in Malaysia. Malaysia is flat. Liberia is hilly. And our trucks are going to have trouble getting up those hills with the latex. Think about that for a minute. Think about that. The company is saying that the hill is too steep for their trucks to make it up, but they have no problem with human beings yoked with 150 pounds across their back trudging up those hills, right? This was Firestone's position. So I guess Firestone really needs to maybe start their own Flat Earth Society for occupational health and safety, maybe. But Firestone, Fawul did not back down. They insisted on changing the method of transportation. And this last July, we were on a delegation where we were able to see the beginnings of a change in the system. They're beginning to use trucks and tractors to transport the latex. But Firestone is still dragging its heels. They still have not extended this system to every part of the plantation. They're still putting up resistance. So the work is not done. We need, all of us need to continue to put the pressure on Firestone. The gains made by Fawul have been affirmed by their members. Just 3 weeks ago, they had a second union election, and the leaders of this whole process were reelected in a landslide. So tonight, we celebrate the achievements of the Firestone workers and of international solidarity, but tomorrow, we need to get back in the trenches. We need to keep Firestone's feet to the fire, and from Madison, Wisconsin to Monrovia, Liberia, we can't let up until every worker has the dignity, the respect, and the fairness that are basic human rights. I just want to do one more thing. Okay, well, we're in the House of Labor here, right? The CWA. Well, during the Firestone organizing campaign, there was a lot of intimidation. There was a lot of fear. They rallied the workers. They led them in chants to get everybody out there together. So let's do one, okay? When I say union, you say yes. When I say union, you say yes. Union! Yes! Union! Yes! Union! Yes! Union! Yes! Union! Yes! Union!